We continue our countdown to the 2023-24 NHL season, and we continue to look at our Pacific Division rivals. Erica Ayala joining us, the host of Locked On Kraken, next on Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're also on YouTube, but please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years. And of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We're continuing to count down to opening night in the National Hockey League, and we continue our previews of our rivals from the Pacific Division. Today, a look at the Seattle Kraken. And for that, we welcome in the host of Locked On Kraken. That is Erica Ayala. Hey, Erica, thanks for joining us. How you been?
I've been well. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Eddie. I'm here in Seattle for training camp. We just had our first preseason game at the day that we're recording. So, it's hockey season again. Can't be more thrilled.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Good to talk about actual games that are going to be taking place and seeing things that develop. You never know what the story is going to be, and the Seattle Kraken are certainly a perfect example of that from last season. One of the biggest surprises in the NHL. Struggled their inaugural season, but then year two, make the playoffs, 100-point season, and then you get in the playoffs, you upset the Colorado Avalanche in the first round in a 7-game series, and then they push the Dallas Stars to a 7-game series in round number 2. How much did last season really kind of get the attention of the Seattle sports fans and kind of energize the organization going forward here?
I think that Seattle sports fans, they were endeared by the team in season 1. I think it definitely expanded. Anytime you can make a postseason run, that's exciting, especially given what some of the other Seattle sports teams were doing. The Seattle Storm had made a push, but we knew it was the last gasp with Sue Bird retiring, and they didn't have a great year this year. The Mariners were, in the last 2 seasons, they fell just shy and then made the playoffs, but it was a short stint. So I think the excitement of another Seattle sports team being able to make a playoff run was really exciting. It was interesting, though, last night at our preseason game split squad with Calgary, so half of the team in Calgary, half of the team here, that our AHL team that made a run all the way to the Calder Cup finals, overtime in Game 7, and then lost to the Hershey Bears. It was interesting to hear that team and that franchise really get locals on board in their first year, making that deep playoff run. So I do think that overall throughout the entire organization, again, making playoff runs is always helpful. And so I think it's a little bit of pressure for the guys that are returning, but they also want to make good on that pressure. They want to be able to show fans that have been loyal and fans that they won over because they made a playoff run that it's not a fluke. And that's what this season is going to be all about.
Yeah, you're talking about the Coachella Valley Firebirds, not too far from Los Angeles. They had a great season last year, their first season in the AHL. So the narrative I'm hearing for the Kraken, I'm sure you're hearing it too, is that, this team is not going to sneak up on anyone this year. Everything kind of went right for him last year. Do you think that narrative is accurate or not?
Well, I think just generally in sports, right? If someone smacks you in the mouth the one time, you get taken by surprise and you're not likely to want to get smacked again. So I think that there is something broadly speaking, generally speaking, that yes, that the Seattle Kraken are not going to take anyone by surprise. I think also what was most surprising, perhaps even to myself watching the team, was how well our fourth line performed. But if you look at who were the mainstays on our fourth line, none of them are on this Seattle Kraken team. So on the one hand, you have everyone kind of not being surprised by the Seattle Kraken. It was Jared McCann on the first day of training camp. He said, yeah, I did feel as though early on, people didn't maybe give us their full attention 100% on the ice, but they couldn't do that the next time they saw us. So no one's going to be taking them lightly. It's the same thing with our Calder Award winner, right? No one's going to be taking Maddie Beniers lightly. So there has to be a leveling up. And I know we'll get into this a little bit, but we also have to take into consideration that other teams in the Pacific Division and certainly throughout the entire NHL have made trades. They have, there are retirements and all kinds of other moves that are going to make every team a little bit different. So as much as you can say it's a narrative for the Seattle Kraken, I think honestly it's just a restart, right? We're in a brand new season. So there's a little bit of a feeling out period that's going to happen. The difference with the Seattle Kraken this year is that we have a pretty strong schedule to open the season. So there's a lot that has to be done right now with the team. And that's why I've said on Locked on Kraken, this has to be the most competitive training camp that the franchise has ever seen. And there are a few guys that are fighting for spots. So we'll see if that pays dividends as we take on Vegas, Nashville, Colorado, and the like early on.
You mentioned Jared McCann. He led the Kraken with 70 points, and that was tied for 59th in the league for your leading scorer. However, Seattle also had 13 different players score 33 points or more. So you certainly had maybe no big superstar, but a lot of cast of characters that can get it done. I wonder, though, is there a thought in Seattle that ultimately to get to where you want to be, the Kraken are going to have to go out and get a big time player to kind of not build around, but kind of lead the way, so to speak?
Yeah, we talk about this a lot on Locked on Kraken, and there are a few things that I would say to that. One is that Jared McCann ended the season as our leading point scorer because Andre Burakovsky, who was our leading scorer, went down with injury. And we also spoke to Andre Burakovsky at training camp, and he talked about, when you have a bone break, right? It's pretty clear cut. You know how long you're going to be out. Bone heals up, you're good to go, and you come back. When you have something that's more muscle, or tissue related, he told us 3 setbacks. So that this is a Seattle Kraken team that's hoping to get Andre Burakovsky back healthy. He did not suit up for either one of our split squads. So there was a team in Calgary, a team at Climate Pledge Arena. And so that's one thing. The second thing is, are we going to get 70 points or better from Jared McCann? Who knows? I think we have potential to. Jared McCann is definitely a player who's been motivated to play a different role with the Seattle Kraken. He's the first player that we signed to an extension. Again, he was our leading point scorer last year. He went down with a gnarly injury in the postseason, and so only got a little bit of a taste of that first series. So, I think that he's going to come motivated. But to answer the latter part of the question, again, I on Locked on Kraken have been wanting us to go and fish, no pun intended, for a superstar. If you look at how other teams are built, and they're built for success over time, some of that you can go through the farm system. And I think we are waiting to see what Maddie Beniers will be. We're waiting to see what Shane Wright will be. We have some other young guys who could potentially be that. But we also saw the Seattle Kraken, I think, starting to bridge the gap with some veterans like Justin Schultz. I mentioned Burakovsky, but also bringing in Oliver Bjorkstrand. I mean, you have Vince Dunn. These are names, along with Philip Grubauer, who have won Stanley Cups. And that's important as well. But to get to that next level, right? To, as you said, our highest goal scorer or point scorer was middle of the pack, effectively, when it comes to other NHL individual players and teams. So there is more that has to be done. I have always said we're in a 3 to 5 year rebuild. So I don't think, and we didn't, if I'm being honest, make those moves in the off season. But I think if we don't see the results that we want, and again, the schedule, I think, could play a little bit of a factor in this. If we don't see the results that we want, the trade deadline could be very interesting, because for me, everything that Ron Francis, our general manager, has been saying, again, is to be in that 3 to 5 year, but also once we're a playoff contender, to to remain a playoff contender. So now you're starting what we believe to be the growth period, but you also maybe arrived a little bit earlier in the playoffs than anticipated. So how do we now manage what is the timeline that we're dealing with and not kind of the projections? So I think we still do need that superstar. I think that it's not likely to come before free agency this next off season. That being said, if Ron Francis and company like the market or can make something work with the market and they feel that they need some fresh blood, I think they'll be more willing than they were in the past to make moves.
We'll talk a little bit more about the Seattle Kraken with Erica Ayala, the host of Locked on Kraken, and get her thoughts on the LA Kings a bit. We'll do that in just a second here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Do want to let you know, though, that today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Step into the action this NFL season with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That is $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including point spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We have more with Erica Ayala, the host of Locked on Kraken. A little bit more about the Seattle Kraken. They didn't do a lot, Erica, in the offseason. Kind of feeling like running it back with pretty much the same group. Do you think that that's good enough to get the same result this season?
My honest answer is I don't know. I mentioned in our first segment that we kind of lost our fourth line, who for a while in last season, they were kind of the offense. I mean, the rest of the offense was following their lead, which you don't usually see. So, we did a little mathematics, easy math when it comes to our fourth line. So we lost Daniel Sprong to Detroit. Morgan Geekie is with Boston, and then Ryan Donato in Chicago. And if you just go goal for goal, point for point, the Seattle Kraken, in what they lost and what they brought in, just based on last year's numbers, we don't equal up the goals that we had on the fourth line. So that's a little concerning. But again, Burakovsky was hurt. Kyler Yamamoto has not been healthy, and he's someone that we brought in. Oliver Bjorkstrand, I talked to him earlier this week at training camp. He knew that although he considers himself a little bit of a late starter, likes to get into the groove a little later in the season, it took him a little while longer than usual to get settled with the Seattle Kraken. So it's kind of a lot of again, it's math that we don't know if it's gonna level out. So again, the real answer, if I had to say, is I don't know. I think the opportunity, if I want to be optimistic, is that there are some guys who either know that they can perform better or that are expecting to perform better now that they're healthy. If I'm a little more pessimistic, it goes back to what we talked about before, not having maybe a true bona fide superstar on the team. So you kind of have to go by committee. That being said, the Seattle Kraken were able to figure that out throughout the season last year, and by committee worked for them. So, and a lot of guys who are coming to the team, whether you're talking, Belmar, I've mentioned Yamamoto a few times, Brian Dumoulin, they know that about the Seattle Kraken, and they're buying into it's all hands on deck, do what you can do to win games. So it's a little bit of a toss-up, but I said that about last year's team, and they figured it out. So I'm hopeful that we've laid a strong enough foundation where we're really focused on aggressive checking in all three zones, focusing on possession, that we're really shoring up defensively so that we're not putting Philip Grubauer and whoever our second goalie will be under so much pressure. So I guess it's a little bit of a wait and see. But, I think it's going to be a real opportunity for guys to step up. And again, if they don't, I think that Ron Francis will be ready to make some moves at the trade deadline.
Well, we mentioned, maybe no real superstar, but maybe there could be one. And that's, of course, reigning rookie of the year, Matty Beniers. You mentioned him a moment ago. What's the potential for growth there, and what are the expectations like for season 2 for him?
And that's the thing about Matty Beniers. Talk about this on Locked on Kraken all the time. He's so smart. he learns I'm not exaggerating when I say it almost feels like he learns every minute of every day. We again have had some training camp scrimmages, we've had a preseason game, and his IQ is there. He's gotten, from my eye test, he's gotten stronger. I think he got bullied around, including, he had an unfortunate concussion that kept him out of the All-Star game. In the playoffs, teams were able to target him and, quite honestly, Jared McCann, which of course went a little overboard with his injury. Also, a concussion, if I had to guess. It hasn't officially been announced as such. But, I think that there's a lot of potential there. And again, no one's going to be taken by surprise with Matty Beniers. I've read articles, that just because you win a Calder doesn't mean you're going to be a bona fide superstar in the NHL. I mean, we could list names that have proven that, but Matty's just so smart. He's so intelligent, and he really respects the game. And I have a feeling that he's going to find a way to be the type of player that this team needs. And yes, he's the closest, if I had to guess, to a superstar. And I think Shane Wright had a very weird season last year. I was
actually going to ask you. That was my next question about Shane Wright. Yeah,
I knew it was going to come up. Very weird season, a very weird and dramatic draft.
Real quick, for people that don't know, Erica, Shane Wright was thought to be perhaps the number 1 overall pick in the 2022 draft. He ended up sliding to number 4 to the Kraken, and he spent pretty much all of last year in the AHL. My question was, what is the plan for him this season?
Yeah, and just to boot a little more context, so he was with the Seattle Kraken in the NHL for a number of games because of just all of the different agreements that are in place with junior hockey and things of that nature because of his age. And so there was a lot of fodder when it came to, he's with the NHL team, but he's healthy scratch. He's not suiting up for NHL games. And was he going to stay on the team? Would he get an exemption so that he could be with Coachella Valley for the full season last year? That didn't happen. And we have a little of that trickle over. So once his junior hockey season ended, Shane Wright did play with the Coachella Valley Firebirds that I mentioned, made it all the way to the Calder Cup finals. And he played steady minutes with the AHL squad. This year, he did get an exemption. He was like 1 game shy of the amount of games he needed at the AHL or NHL level at his age before he could, if he doesn't make the NHL team this year, then he could go to Coachella Valley. So we got that out of the way. He's not going back to junior hockey. So no more of that drama. I do think he ends up for the majority of the year in the AHL, and I think that is what will be best for him. The AHL, our Firebird squad, even yesterday, most of them were in Calgary, and if you look at the penalties, especially in the second period, you can kind of get a feel for how our AHL team plays. They're gritty. They don't take mess. They're fast, but they're also a little bit immature. And if anything, Shane Wright, he anchors that team. He steadies and really plays a great leadership role there. So I kind of like him there for the AHL. And I do think that's where he'll end up. But he's gaining that leadership in the AHL. He's getting stronger, just like Matty Beniers. He can be another great centerman for us. So while I don't see the future of Shane Wright, at least the immediate future being in the NHL or starting with the NHL, I like that we know we're going to have him with the Firebirds. I like that he has come back so much more mature, just like Matty Beniers. What I said about Matty, he's very intelligent on the ice. His IQ is just off the charts, always learning. So that's my take on those two. So not quite ready to be tried and true elite level superstars, but they'll definitely be more than serviceable for the Seattle Kraken and, or in Shane Wright's case, the Coachella Valley Firebirds.
Now, I know you are locked on Kraken, but I did want to get your opinion on the LA Kings because we have a lot of different guests. We like to get a lot of different feedback on what other people think about our team. We had a huge trade in the offseason getting Pierre-Luc Dubois from Winnipeg, sending off 3 players from our roster, Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, and Rasmus Kupari. Is there anything looking at the Kings that you're impressed with? Anything you're not impressed with? Concerns, thoughts on how strong they are, just anything in general that you think about when you think about the LA Kings for this season?
Yeah, well, I'll start with this, I guess, just generally. I'm really jealous of squads that have like off-season moves to talk about, that are kind of like national NHL news, because that's not the Seattle Kraken. We're not there yet. Like I said, the biggest national news outside of book talk. Oh my gosh, which was so insane that I had to talk about that on.
Oh yes, the romance novel thing,
Oh
right?
my gosh, and Alex Wenberg, poor guy, and like kudos to his family. Anyway, we can do
Yeah,
that on another.
if you don't know, Google it. It is a
Yeah,
crazy story. Yeah.
we'll share that story on another podcast. But to your question about the Kings, like I said, a little jealous of teams just generally speaking that have these blockbuster trades. As someone who comes from the women's hockey side, I knew of and covered Alex's sister, Julia Ayala. I was a little sad to see him go, but that's just, like a personal connection. But I think what I've always known about the Kings, and when I'm asked to make, Pacific Division predictions, which I'm sure we'll get to as well, the Kings are a team that I think the Seattle Kraken should look to. They are a team that, for me, has had to figure out a way to balance their young talent, because what do we know about the Pacific Division in the last handful of years? That there's been a decent amount of high draft picks, right? And I think the Kings are one of those teams that has been able to not always get it perfect, but has really been trying to find their stride when it comes to balancing young talent, but also pumping in veterans. And we have kind of the Vegas Golden Knights model, the Seattle Kraken are super conservative, I think, just collecting all those draft picks. And then I think the Kings are in a place right now where they can realistically start pressing the right buttons, which for me makes them a top 3 team for sure in the Pacific Division, and a team that the Seattle Kraken is going to have to chase if we want to be in the playoffs outright and not in a wild card spot again.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Pacific Division, but let's do that here in just a moment. We wrap it up with Erica Ayala, the host of Locked on Kraken, here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Erica, before last season, there was a lot of talk about how the Pacific Division was maybe the worst division in hockey. Lo and behold, the Pacific puts 4 teams into the playoffs. 3 of those 4 teams advanced in the playoffs. The one that didn't was the Kings, because they played against another Pacific Division team. And the Stanley Cup winners came from the Pacific Division. So maybe the Pacific not quite so bad as the experts thought. But that was last season. Now this season, do you think the Pacific gets 4 teams in? Could they even get 5 teams in to the playoffs this season?
Well, from where I'm sitting, I sure like our chances if we get 5 more than if we get 4. I mean, and you talk about the Kings being the Pacific team to not advance, but I mean, like you said, taking on another Pacific Division team. I think overall, I think it's a little greedy to say we'll get 5. I think that will be in a pretty good position, if everyone can really kind of do what they did. And I'm really looking at Seattle, because I do think we have to kind of pull up the rear of that top tier. If Seattle can really get some things together, I think we're really leaning in heavily on Andre Burakovsky being healthy and effective. I think that does give us a really good chance. And I want us to be a contender where we're in clean outright and not having to worry about a wild card. It is pouring rain. I don't know if you can hear that, but
I can hear that.
Seattle. That's Seattle,
right.
baby.
That's nice.
So yeah. So that's what I think. I think the Kings, obviously we had that wild game.
Yes, we did.
Kings,
I was going to say the Kings
magic.
and Kraken don't have much of a history yet, but I was at the game 9-8 overtime. That was the craziest game I've ever attended in person. So there is that one matchup that we can talk about.
Yeah, that is wild. That was a wild game. But again, I think to me that showed the grit and the fight that I see in these 2 Pacific Division teams. I do think that the Kings, for me, is just they're a step above and is again a team that we have to chase in the Pacific Division. But I do think that it's a goal of ours. We had an opportunity to be in the top 3 in the Pacific Division, and we just couldn't get it done. We kind of fumbled at the end of the season after that amazing run on the road. And again, something we talk about a lot on Locked on Kraken, but protecting home ice. We've built, and are in what is arguably one of the best kind of event venues in North America for sure. And couldn't protect home ice. So I think that's going to be really important for us. I think Edmonton continues to be a great team. I don't think we have to worry about them yet, but the Sharks, obviously, with new management, kind of releasing some of that salary with the trade, I think that they're going to be a team that, again, is gonna want to gun for us. So, oh gosh, right. And I guess I should probably talk about Vegas. We'll see them obviously for their home opener and their ring ceremony banner celebration. That's going to be amazing. But I think Vegas is a team that, for so long, the story with them has been that they're just kind of trying to throw everything right on the wall to try to be successful. I do wonder with them if they have the right recipe and if they're able to sustain it. I think that's still a question that needs to be answered. But, who's to say? I don't think we can doubt them because, again, they come in as reigning champions. So, Calgary, I don't really know what to say about Calgary these days. As we were coming into the division, they were in one place and then they swiftly fell out of that. So I guess we have to see. And the Ducks, I think it's fair to say, still have a lot of work to do. So again, that 3 to 5 year plan coming from the Seattle Kraken perspective, if we're going to get to be a perennial playoff team, we have to do it now, because we cannot rely on the quote unquote being in the quote unquote worst division any longer, because I don't think that's going to be true very much longer, if it is true at all, even today.
All right, that is Erica Ayala, the host of Locked On Kraken. Check her out on Twitter at elindsay08, and also Locked On Kraken at Locked On Kraken. And of course, you can find her show in all the same wonderful places that you can find this show. Erica, great to talk to you. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing what the Kraken have to offer this season. And we'll follow you on Locked On Kraken all season long.
Oh, please do. And we'll make sure to send some Kraken fans over there. And we got to make sure we do another one of these as we come up to our time on the schedule.
Well, you remember last year we had a little 4-team roundtable with the other hosts. That was fun. So we'll hopefully have one of those as well coming up this season.
Thanks.
All right, so Erica, stay dry. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, for you everydayers, those of you that watch and listen every day, coming up on Friday's show, of course, we'll have our weekly fan feedback show. And on Thursday's show, we're scheduled to be joined by LA Kings insider Zach Dooley. We'll talk to him about his trip to Melbourne, Australia, where he saw up close and personal the Kings' 2 Global Series games. Of course, if you have any questions you want to email, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments on the shows, on the YouTube episodes as well. And we'd love you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.